Good morning, everybody, and thank you once again for tuning into my YouTube channel. It's really lovely to see the channel growing, and I really appreciate all of you that hang around and help build the community here. It's really nice to see. Okay, so today, as promised a few weeks back, I'm going to do my first Q&A session. I'm trying to keep the channel as interesting for everybody as possible. A little bit of Fujifilm tech stuff, as well as weddings, street inspiration, etc. So I hope you are finding it useful. As ever, please do remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel. It helps me out a lot, and it's nice to have conversation in the comments. I do try and reply to as many as possible, as humanly possible, that is. Okay, so I had over 150 questions for this Q&A session, so I've picked about 10 or 12 at random to go over today. If this works out, I'll probably do a Q&A session every few months or so. I guess we'll see how it goes first, and let me know if you think this is a useful thing to do. All right, so let's get into it, the first Q&A session. The first question comes from Chris Whiskey. What a cool name, Chris Whiskey. I wonder if that is his surname. Hi Kevin, curious how you feel about the worms that seem to plague any Fujifilm forum or Facebook page. I know the X-Trans 4 sensor seems to be a tad more grainy compared to the X-Trans 3 at high ISO, at least in Lightroom, which I think you mainly use. Do you ever put out images at 12,800 ISO? Too many pixel peepers on YouTube zooming in at 100%, do you think? He says there that he may have rambled a little bit, and he'll see me at the workshop in Belfast perhaps. Okay, so my thoughts on this are kind of straightforward, I think. I've seen worms for sure, but not often, and nowhere near enough times for me to worry about it. It was worse with the X-Trans 2 sensor, if I remember rightly, and then Adobe worked on the RAW processor to correct it for the most part. I honestly can't say that I experience it now, and if I do, it's not enough for me to notice. I'll happily shoot at 12,800 ISO and process the images in Lightroom. Alien Skin Exposure supports XT3 soon, and I'll be doing it more in there. Maybe even with Nick Silver effects, I'll be putting some images through there. But right now, I'm more than happy with the high ISO images I get from Lightroom as it stands with the XT3, because it's specifically about the XT3. I totally understand that people who are doing very fine art images and printing them need to check every pixel. But for me and the type of work that I do, it's not really a consideration. So this image is straight from the camera at 12,800 ISO, handheld, 1/60th of a second if I remember rightly. No adjustments here. Now bear in mind I've had to crop it to 16:9 for this presentation, but it's perfectly good for my needs. Of course there is some grain, but I really wouldn't consider that anything other than normal for an image at 12,800 ISO. Now, this is the processed version of that image, by the way, processed using my standard black and white conversion technique in Lightroom. Again, the noise in the shadows for sure, but I personally think that kind of adds to the image rather than takes it away. I certainly wouldn't want to flashlight this picture, so for me it's fine, and I'm not concerned at all about any kind of worm effects. Now, this next one is again taken at 12,800, it's handheld. This is a JPEG straight from the camera, no editing at all, nothing, it's just a direct JPEG. So in this image, because it's a JPEG, it's taken on board the camera's noise reduction algorithm, which since the X-Trans 3 is great in my experience. Of course, I'm not saying that people aren't seeing the worm effect. Too many people have mentioned it for it not to be a thing, so it's clearly a thing. But I believe it's something that A, I'm not particularly worried about because I rarely see it, and B, it's actually an Adobe concern really. As I'm filming this today, Adobe have actually released a new version of Lightroom, which finally allows us to reorder the develop panel at last. So it may well be they've adapted the RAW processing engine a bit more, who knows? And yeah, Chris, we can talk about this in Belfast when I see you in July, I think that will be. So I look forward to seeing you there. Quaijibo van de Kamp. Now that's a name, and I've definitely got it wrong, and I apologise. Ex-photographers usually tend to talk just good things about Fujifilm. Is there for you anything really annoying about the system or the company itself? Okay, so thanks for the question, and believe it or not, it's a pet peeve of mine too. There are now hundreds of ex-photographers, and while some people think we do it for a pretty penny, we're a shill, as they say, that's not the case at all. Here in the UK at least, we're not bound by any rules that say we have to say good things. And we certainly don't get censored in any way at all. In fact, we spend a lot of time feeding back issues with cameras to Japan, and that takes up a lot of our time, which hopefully in the future will allow for even better gear to come all of our way. That's the whole point of it, right? That's the whole point of being an ambassador. I'm very open when I feel there is an issue with something, regardless what it is. However, bear in mind that all camera features are there for one reason or another. Just because I may not appreciate a feature doesn't mean others don't. So, for example, I did a video about the XH1. I really don't like that camera, and I happily discussed that in my video. I'm happy to admit it. It's not a camera for me. That doesn't mean it's a bad camera, of course, and I know some people who love that camera, but for me, it went away from the ethos of the X series, or the XDNA as Fujifilm like to call it, and it just wasn't for me. I didn't put a review out saying it was brilliant, because that would be disingenuous, and that's not what I'm about. I believe and hope you guys know I have integrity, and when I have negative opinions, I share those too. Another example, I suppose, is the X100F. When we were testing the X100F, I implored Fujifilm to swap the Q button with the AFL button. They recognised the request, but it didn't happen. Only they know the reasons behind why that didn't happen, why they stuck with it. It's a major flaw in the X100F in my mind. In the future, if there is a future for the X100, I'd love to see the Q button, a custom button, so we can set it to whatever we want. Now, it annoys me, especially on social media, when X-photographers are so one-eyed. It's just not possible for every camera that Fujifilm bring out to be perfect or the best camera ever. Life just doesn't work like that, and I would hope that all X-photographers realise that whilst they have a symbiotic relationship with Fujifilm, they also have a responsibility as the conduit, I suppose, between them and you, the photographers, to be honest and forthright with their opinions. What's the point in being an ambassador otherwise? Now, of course, none of us are going to be overly negative. That's just not how good business relationships can be sustained. But I know for a fact that Fujifilm actively speak to all X-photographers, take on board their thoughts and concerns, and feed that back to the research and development team back in Tokyo. If you want my personal opinion on the X-photographer scheme, it's this. I'm happy to say it, even though it's probably not towing the Fujifilm line. I think there are way too many of us. I like how Canon have their tiered approach to ambassadors, and I'd love Fujifilm to do something along those lines in the future too. However, it's absolutely nothing to do with me. All those decisions come from Tokyo, and as it stands, we are getting more X-photographers every month. I understand the benefits to Fujifilm, of course, but I feel it dilutes the strength of the integrity of the X-photographer scheme a little bit, I guess. Do you see what I'm saying? It's also worth pointing out that I feel a lot of aspiring X-photographers believe this. We do not get stuff for free, in terms of gear, that is. I've bought my XT3, which I'm filming this on, just like everybody else. In fact, in the new year, I'll be buying a second one. My GFX 50R also needs to be purchased in the new year. Whilst, we get pre-production models for testing, those go back to Japan. They all go back to Japan. Now, don't get me wrong, though. I get a lot from the relationship, and I greatly enjoy it. I get to do workshops, and I get some travel gigs, and of course, it's good for my clients to see that I'm an ambassador. But at the end of the day, it's my clients that feed my business, not Fujifilm, and it's a foolish photographer who nails their flag to the good ship ego. We all want exposure, of course, but I see the X-photographer scheme as something I work bloody hard at, mostly with things that you guys never see. And yes, I get my rewards for it, but it is business. It's business. It's a business relationship. And as with all business relationships, it has to be built on integrity. If you lose your integrity, then I feel you lose your right to have an opinion. Raksh 9. Were you influenced by any photographers in particular? Are there any photographers you admire or follow at present, and what do you gain from their work? Yes, absolutely. I think I've mentioned it several times before on the channel, but the reason I came into wedding photography was because of Jeff Askoff, who is, or was, as I think he's retired now, a documentary wedding photographer based in the northwest of England. His work mesmerised me at the time when I knew nothing about photography at all, especially weddings. If I had to pick one person who influenced me in a dramatic way in terms of photography, it would be him. He was a Canon ambassador, and back in the day was widely regarded as one of, probably, if not the best documentary wedding photographers in the world. I learned a lot from Jeff and his work, and it's a bit of a shame in my mind that he doesn't seem to shoot weddings any longer. Now, of course, that was over 10 years ago, and since I came into the photography world, I've been exposed to so many wonderful photographers. both personally, through books, online, etc. And today I love the work of contemporary as well as classic street photographers. Joel Meyerowitz, for example, is the person whose street images speak to me the most, I suppose. I love his work, and I'm pretty sure I have all of his books somewhere. Some of his iconic images I can look at for hours, and even his still life and landscape work is just beautiful. When I listen to Joel speaking about street photography, it's very cathartic. He manages eloquently to discuss the mechanics of shooting on the street, and in turn, he turns it into an art form. When he talks about being balletic with the scene in front of him, it just makes sense, right? He had, and probably still does, an amazing ability to merge with the streets, to be part of it, to have this cloak of invisibility that we all wish we had. A wonderful photographer and an incredible teacher of the art too. There are so many, including Matt Stewart, who is now a Magnum nominee, I believe. His quirky vision gives an insight into the creative eye that I think very few people have. I'd love to be able to see as he sees, I really would. I've seen him actually a few times at Covent Garden out shooting, and it's great to see an active photographer out photographing real street photography. I hope he gets to become a full Magnum member, as his work deserves that platform immensely. Great photographer. And of course, during my time in the industry, I've gotten to know other photographers that just leave me in awe. For example, I recently spent time with Eric Bouvet. He's another ex-photographer, but someone who has stories that would haunt your soul. I struggle at times validating my own photography as anything other than snapshots, especially when I'm exposed to the work of people like Eric. I have nothing but incredible admiration and grateful thanks for people like Eric and Tom Stoddart, who I also know. They are true documentarians of our time, and without the risks they take and the pictures they make, history would not have the tales to tell that we all need and expect. Alex Zarajbaman, who knows? As someone wanted to start photography and wanting to pursue documentary wedding photography, how to present myself, behave so that people won't expect those standard posed photos. Okay, so I think this question is about shooting on the day rather than about branding and marketing, etc. I think so. And I'm guessing the question is, how do I avoid being asked by other guests to take portraits of them throughout the day? Well, the fact is, this does occasionally happen, not often, but occasionally. And you know what? I'm not going to get all boisterous about it and say, no, I'm a documentary photographer, don't you know? Of course I'll take the shot, but what I'll do immediately after is put my head down, probably check the image on the back of the camera, and move to another part of the room or wedding area. That way, if anybody nearby has seen you take the shot, then you're not going to give them a chance to say, oh, and me too, please. So you just kind of, common sense, just move away from it. Now, this isn't me being awkward or rude. This is me freeing up my time to do the job that the clients employed me to do. You have to be realistic, of course, and I think there is cultural points too. Remember, in different parts of the world, different expectations exist at weddings. Most critically, of course, is the gear I use and how I carry it. I'll shoot with 2 small cameras. I always use the black cameras, not the silver ones. I never use kind of crossbody harnesses. I never use big lenses. I have one camera in my pocket or on a small spider holster, and the other is on a very discreet strap. As soon as you start kind of pimping out your gear at weddings, using red rope straps, beautiful brown leather cross harnesses, brightly coloured shutter buttons, etc., you just stand out more. You just do. It's just more obvious that you are the wedding photographer. And I don't want that to happen. I never carry a bag. I have a bag, but I don't have it on me, and I don't have a lens bag around my waist, etc. I dress like a guest, not like a ninja, and I do my absolute best to blend in as much as possible. If it's a regular wedding, I'll wear a jacket, shirt, trousers. If it's a black tie affair, I'll wear a black tie. And, once I went dressed as a crocodile, believe it or not, as it was a fancy dress wedding. And that's a true story. This is a comment I had from a bride recently, and it's a feedback from a wedding that I shot last July, actually. Wow, not really sure where to start. We had high expectations for how these photographs would turn out, but really these have blown us away. Totally amazed at how intimate these shots are, and yet so many of our guests thought that we didn't have a professional photographer there. You've captured the true characters of our family and friends, and yet I would imagine that to most you barely uttered even a word. Whoever said you needed words to tell a story, so impressed. Now that's a perfect testimony for me. That's exactly what I want to be like. It's so important, for me to be like that. Now, of course, I'm not suggesting at all that this is the only way to work. Many people love to take the portraits and direct the day, and they will do it in their own way, and that's absolutely fine. But for me, as someone who wants to shoot pure candid work, I have to give myself the best chance of doing that, I suppose. I find being as discreet as possible affords me that pleasure. Ben C. I'd love to hear more about the story behind the Cargate Collective and how you became involved with the group. It's very inspiring. So it's Cargate, not Cage, or Kage. Cargate. Cargate is Japanese for shadow, by the way. And it's a great question, Ben. The Cargate Collective is something I'm immensely proud of to be a member, but I feel like a total imposter. For those that don't know about the Cargate Collective, I'll link to it below, obviously. It's a group of 8 photographers from around the world who like to be creative and create visual essays based on any kind of subject, really. It was founded by my good friend and amazing photographer, Patrick LaRocque. Such a cool name. And we also have Bert Stefani, Derek Clark, Jonas Rask, Robert Cato, Vincent Baldensberger, and also Dominique Shaw now, who's the newest member. Pat, as many of you know, has this insane talent to make the mundane beautiful. He really epitomizes the term looking for the extraordinary in the ordinary. He's a fine photographer and a forward thinker too. His writing is passionate and he has a brilliant musical talent too. He's a general all-round git for being so good at everything. Bert also is an incredible photographer and teacher. I've spent a lot of time with Bert and class him as one of my best buddies, mostly because he can help me reach things on higher shelves, but also because he's there to answer any questions for me, whether it's technical, personal, or otherwise. Bert is one of the finest products to come out of Belgium. Derek is a fellow Brit. He's from Scotland, actually, and he is a great street photographer, but his images from the jazz world are incredible. He's had album covers, book covers, featured all over the world. His use of black and white is legendary, I suppose, and again, I'm proud to be in the same group of people as him. Check out his jazz work. It's superb. Jonas is already a legend, of course. Most of you will already know him. He's the one that shoots the pack images of the Fujifilm products, by the way. And as a doctor by trade, I have no idea how he finds time to make his amazing images as well as save lives. He's a proper modern-day Superman. Robert Cato is a Canadian living in Australia, and because he's so far away, I've never actually met him. I love his work though, and I feel I know him personally through that, and I really do look forward to meeting him one day, and hopefully it will happen. Vincent is based in Paris, and I defy anybody to look at his portraits and not see into the soul of the subject. I study his portraits intensely, and if there was anybody's portraiture work I would aspire to, it's Vincent's, though of course I don't think anybody can replicate his images. There's a real majesty in them that is second to none. And finally we have Dominique, who is the newest and most welcome member of the Cargate Collective, of course. She's a fellow wedding photographer in the UK. I love her work. I invited her, in fact, and her equally talented brother Liam to speak at the X Weddings conference earlier in the year. Their wedding photography is colourful, passionate and witty. Check it out. The collective as a whole it's not a commercial thing. We aren't there really to make money, but we're there to encourage each other and create images outside of our daily work, daily grind. We want to be storytellers, and the collective is the medium we use to do that. Of course, we share these stories and these journeys, and if you haven't seen the collective before, please head over to the website and have a look. Maybe hope to see you there. It's a nice place. Okay, next question. Jason D. I'm considering using Fujifilm cameras for my wedding work, but I'd love to know what your workaround tips are with the sharpening and details issues with RAW files in Lightroom. I've tried Capture One, and the details and sharpening controls are superior, but I don't want to leave behind my years of Lightroom experience and all of my presets. I think a lot of people are going through this right now, by the way, this whole Capture One, switching over to Capture One stuff. Now, this is a question that comes up a lot, and believe it or not, I don't do any sharpening in Lightroom, Photoshop, Capture One, Alien Skin, none of that. I keep the default sharpening in each application. We're talking RAW files here, of course, not JPEGs. When it comes to exporting my images, let's take Lightroom as an example. I'll just select the standard preset for the medium the image will be going to upon export. Now, for example, you can see here as I export this image, let's say I'm going to export this for my website, I'll choose screen as the sharpening option and standard, and just let Lightroom do the rest. Now, let's say I want to export it for an album. I'll choose matte paper because all my albums are printed on matte paper. And again, standard. It's pretty simple, really. That's literally all I do. Instantly, you'll see I've set up export presets, so I don't need to actually change this each time. It's a very, very simple process. I totally get why people do find sharpening, especially landscape, commercial, architectural photographers, etc. But for me, I'm happy with the defaults, and it keeps my workflow very slick. That's it. I know it's a pretty boring answer, but that's the truth of it. Okay, on to the next question. YSN. Do you use non-paid photography, the one just for the pleasure of it, for escaping from or diving into reality? As far as I figured it out, every artist has some existential issues, which are part of the artistic nature of a person. So the question is targeted at your point of view as an artist. What a great question. And absolutely, yeah, definitely. I have many friends in the industry who shoot a wedding on a Saturday, put their camera down and don't pick them up again until the following wedding. And I think that is incredibly, incredibly sad. For me, I'm always shooting my family. And, I've mentioned this many times on the channel before. I love having a camera with me at all times. And whilst I don't always have the time to curate an actual project, I always want photography to be a passion first and an income second. That's really important. Passion first, income second. Even though it's just snapshots of family life, it's as much a personal documentary of our lives as it is a cathartic exercise to enjoy photography. And I don't just want to snap the happy smiley faces that we all see on social media. I've been documenting my kids since before they were born, and I continue to do so, even when it's not images we particularly want to remember. But there is a difference, I think, between wanting to remember and should remember. Now, additionally, I shoot a lot of street photography. Some of my recent shots from Tokyo were simply me enjoying where I was. Simple as that. This wasn't a commission, of course, but that doesn't stop me from shooting. It's all about finding the time and places to shoot. It's very easy, I feel, to let time get in the way of creativity. Of course, I struggle with this too. I mean, right now I'm making this film, and there's a reason for that, of course. But should I be out shooting instead? Should I? There's a fine line, and I do try and shoot as much as I can. And I would love to take on more social projects, such as the amazing and very important work of people like Jim Mortram. With his Small Town Inertia project, Jim has made it his life's mission to help the needy through his use of visual art. And he has done an amazing job of that, probably at much expense of his own. Now, we need more Jim Mortrams in the world, but that's a very simplistic attitude to take. From my own personal lives, from our own personal lives, we can only work in the parameters that we make for ourselves. Can we break those parameters? Can we move outside of those personal boundaries? Of course we can, and we should. And it's something I wish I was more capable of doing, I suppose. But I'm giving it my best effort, that's for sure. Jacob Coffin. Do you always shoot everything 100% manual, or are there circumstances you deem it necessary to throw one of the dials into A or auto? If so, what's your thought process around this? No, is the answer. I very rarely shoot fully manually. I'm a big believer in that the elves inside the camera are far more capable of doing their job than I am. If I can set the camera up so that my only responsibility is seeing, then that's what I'll do. For example, if the light is good and I'm not looking for an artistic use of shutter speed or depth of field, I'll put everything on auto. I'm not embarrassed to say that. I'm 100% sure that many images that I've got wouldn't have been able to be captured if I were changing the camera settings and fiddling about with the camera. I'd say that a majority of my day is spent in aperture priority and the rest fully auto. It's very, very rare for me to use fully manual these days. And that's partly because the metering and the ability of the cameras I use are just so much better at working out all of that stuff than I am. I often say to my students on my workshops that anybody can be a photographer, and I really believe this. Anybody can understand aperture, shutter speed, ISO, etc. Anybody can press the shutter button on the top of the camera. They can train monkeys to do that. But only you can see what you see. Only you can make the picture you want to make. And that's a good thing in my mind. Now, of course, you should understand how to use your camera fully manually, but that doesn't mean you have to use it. Pilots know how to fly an aircraft fully manually, right? But in almost all cases, they rely on the autopilot because it's better. It's going to do the job better. At least I hope that's the reason. He says, still remembering my last flight when I was hit by lightning as we approached Heathrow. But that's a story for another day, I think. Okay, next question. Julio Hernandez. Now that we have the Fuji X-T3, what do you think are the weaknesses of the X-T2 that a user must recognize for an upgrade? Please don't sugarcoat it or go soft with the answer. I understand your position as a Fuji ambassador. I just need to know the opinion of a powerful and knowledgeable user as yourself in this matter. Okay, so firstly, there's that point about ex-photographers again, and the question on, I suppose, and I'm sure it's not meant this way, but a little bit on integrity. Anyway, the fact is, just because the XT3 is here and it's better, it doesn't make the XT2 a worse camera. It just makes it less able in certain areas than the XT3. I always say if the camera you have does the job you need it to do, then there's no need to upgrade at all. Don't do it. I still use my XT2. I shot it along with my XT3 at last weekend's wedding. It's an undeniable fact though that the XT3 is faster, both in autofocus acquisition, reliability, physically shooting. If that's how you work, then the XT3 is better for you. Personally, I got the XT3 for its filming capabilities. But as soon as I started shooting with the XT3, I understood the harsh fact that it is better than the XT2. And that's a simple fact. But that doesn't make the XT2 bad. Of course it doesn't. If you feel that you need the benefits that the XT3 gives you, and I did a video about this, I'll link it, then go for it. Otherwise, save your money and spend it on a holiday or something else. XT2 is still a very, very fine camera. Okay, Sydney Image. Hi Kevin, looking forward to the Q&A. Thank you. There's been plenty of talk about full frame versus crop and whether it matters. What do you think? Also, is there room in your kit for medium format? Thank you. Okay, so thanks, Sydney. I guess the best way to answer this is to say that I haven't used a full frame camera since 2012, when I sold the last of my Canon gear, very capable Canon gear that it was. Back in those days, I was using a Canon 1D Mark IV, I think, which I don't even think was actually full frame, and a 5D Mark II, which was full frame, or it might be a 5D Mark I. I don't miss it. I don't look back at any images and think, oh, I wish there was more depth of field there. But I also appreciate for others, depth of field is critical, and full frame may be better for them. That's the way it is. For me, though, it's not an issue. When I shoot with medium format cameras, it's not for the depth of field. It's for the insane print quality and the dynamic range and overall file size. Not really because of the depth of field. That's not necessarily something that comes into my mind. Peter Huang. Hi, I'm a big fan from Indonesia, thank you, and I want to tell you that you and your work inspire me so much in photography, thank you. One question, when you shoot for weddings or events with the X Pro 2, are you using the OVF more than the EVF? Thank you. Okay, so thanks for the kind words, of course, and I have to say nowadays with the X Pro 2, I almost always use the electronic viewfinder. The OVF is nice to have in very low light, but for me, as the EVF refresh rate is now pretty much perfect, I tend to use that almost all the time. I can see the image, and I can see the exposure, and I can meter easier using the electronic viewfinder over the optical. I hope that if there is ever another X Pro, they do keep the OVF though, of course. It's important to some people, and it does offer a bit quicker way of shooting. But for me, generally now, I have to say, I use the EVF pretty much all the time. I am Neil Lyons. When you're going to watch some real rugby, aka rugby league, okay, that's a fair call. I actually like rugby league, but I don't have Sky Sports, so here in the UK, I can't see much of it. Also, Wales are very, very bad at rugby league, so it would depress me even more. Okay, next question. Loic Magnian. I'm sure I'm getting these names wrong. How do you deal with the awful manual focusing ring on the X100F? Whenever you turn on or off the camera or it goes to standby, the last focus distance is lost and reset to a random number between 1 meter and infinity. How do you know what you are focusing on using the OVF? My goal is to lock the focus distance to 1 meter and use F8, but I can't do it. Okay, so I think what you're referring to was fixed in a firmware update, actually. There was a firmware update to the X100F shortly after it was released that fixed this. I agree with you, it was definitely annoying. It was one of the things I raised with them. I think it was firmware 101. The X100F now is at firmware 2. If you head over to the Fujifilm website and download the firmware to a blank SD card, pop it in the camera, hold down the disc back button when switching on, it will step you through the firmware update, and pretty sure that should sort you out, look. Makes that problem go away, which I agree was very annoying. Martin Nichols. Hi Kevin, I really enjoy your work. Would you mind me asking what the monitor in the background of your latest video is and how you find it? Thanks. That'll be this one here, I guess. So the monitor I use, and the one you can see in the background, is the BenQ SW320. I'll leave a link to it below. It's big and heavy, but it's a great monitor. I use an X-Rite i1 display color calibration system with it. And again, I'll link that below. Hope that answers the question. Paul Carpenter, back button focusing, yes or no? Yes, always. As my friend Matt Hart would say, it's as simple as that, really. Next question, Robin H. Love some of the new night shots from Tokyo. Could you talk about how you get them? Handheld, I assume, electronic shutter, ISO settings, auto or manual. How big could you blow them up? Tricky to see on YouTube. Okay, so thanks, Robin. Thanks for the comments on the pictures. The video for the images in Tokyo didn't have the EXIF data displayed in the video. However, if you head over to my F16 website, I'll link it again below, to the blog post about that trip, you'll see all the EXIF data and a few more images. In fact, they're all handheld and all EVF, though most of them were shot from the hip, so not looking through the viewfinder. I haven't printed any of them off yet, but I would easily expect them to print at large sizes. I've had images from my X Pro 1 printed at 3 meters wide, so no issues there. You know, the the X100F that those images were on has got a great sensor. Manuel Angel Gonzalez. Hi, what about black and white sports documentary photography? Not the typical sports pictures, tackles, tries, lineouts and the likes. I think he's talking about rugby. But something different, something centered on the players or public instead of on the games. Less focus on quasi-infinite image definition and more on image meaning. Have you tried this? Thanks. Hi, Manuel. Yeah, thanks for the question. And funny you should say that. I actually get commissioned by the Great Run Company, who run things like the Great North Run, Great South Run, etc., to cover some of the runs they do here in the southwest of England. I shot the Bristol Half Marathon recently, and the remit is not the standard sports photos, as you mentioned, but more about the personal effort and the challenges of the everyday person who runs the races. Not the leaders, not the people who are winning it, but the real people. You know, I love doing it, and it's amazing to see people test themselves to the limits. There's a personal story to everybody, I believe that, whether it's getting across the finishing line of the race or simply supporting a charity that is close to their heart. It's wonderful to photograph, and it's so different to the normal shooting that I do regularly that it's a job I really, really look forward to, and I hope to do some more of it in the future for them. I shot all of these images you're seeing now on the XT2 with a 16 to 55mm lens, and that's a great combination actually of fast lens that allows me to still try and tell a story. I can go wide or long with it. These images aren't black and white though, as the brief for me was full color, but given the time I may do a blog post about this race and re-edit some of the images, as there are some images definitely that I feel are powerful in their own right, and I'd like to talk more about them. When I shoot these races, by the way, I have to get home and get the edits and images up the wire within a couple of hours, so it's a time critical job, but one that I really enjoy doing. So yeah, thanks for the question. All right, that's it. I think that's enough for this Q&A session. I'll put a call out for the next set of questions in due course. In the meantime, I hope you found this little chat useful or helpful in some way. Sorry for the questions that I didn't answer. I have kept them all, I promise. So I will try and get to them at some point. Some of them kind of overlap each other. Please feel free to comment below. I'll answer as much as I can. And of course, please do like, share, hit that bell icon, all of that good stuff. Have a lovely day. Happy shooting, and I shall see you next time.